Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of World Cup Group Talks, where I will be talking about every single nation from each of the 8 groups. Given that it will be 8 groups going into the summer's World Cup, it's going to be 8 episodes with a feature guest joining me to talk about one of the nations being featured in the group. To kick things off, we're going to be talking about Group G, and Mia Eriksson is our guest today, joining us to talk about all things Sweden. Mia covers all things Scandinavian football with a great focus on the Swedish national team as well as the Swedish League. She does plenty of women's football analysis for Playmaker Eye, as well as being the co-host of their Pitch podcast. Now, without further ado, let's get things rolling with Sweden and with Mia Eriksson. So I am very excited to talk all things Sweden ahead of the Summer Women's World Cup with none other than Mia Eriksson. Mia, welcome to the series launch episode. It's going to be a very special one because we're kicking things off with you and Sweden. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm very honored, as a Swede and for Sweden's women's national team.
Well, there's no other person to talk about Sweden to you. So we're going to start off pretty nice and quickly. Let's talk about the third ranked best country in the world. The 23-player squad just recently dropped. Were there any major surprises from the names when you were looking at it? Was it kind of what you expected? There was a clear kind of leniency to those of the veterans with a good mix of impressive youngsters. But were there any kind of major surprises looking at the roster?
I think for me, no. I think for many other people, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I can answer this from 2 perspectives. So there's no surprises to me looking at the squad if all the players had been injury free before the tournament. Then I have absolutely nothing to say about it. From the injury perspective, I would say that Lina Hurtig is the player that surprised me the most to be in the squad. But then I do think that people forget that it's when Peter Gerhardsson announced the squad yesterday, it's still 40 days till the tournament kicks off. So I'm still not sure that this is the final squad for Sweden, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Another thing that kind of surprised me was the third goalkeeper choice, Tove Enblom, that is playing as a goalkeeper for KIF Örebro. That is it's a bottom team in the Swedish League. She has been selected for the last 2 gatherings, I think, with Sweden. So I do think that that's the case. She has just been with the team, and when she has been in training with the Swedish national team, she has been doing really well. I think she is a hard one to evaluate from looking at the Swedish League, because I do think that KIF Örebro is not happy where they are in the table at the moment.
Yeah. And in a World Cup like this, because Sweden is such a big tournament team that has a lot of their players already gone to these big tournaments, is it good that there's a fair amount of veterans going into this World Cup? I know there was a fair amount of talk of certain veterans or kind of the bigger names still being involved, like you mentioned, a little bit more injury prone or haven't been injured throughout the last few months anyway. But is that a really crucial part when you're going into a major tournament like this? You need that experience.
Well, I do think like I said before, by looking at things from different perspectives, because I do think that you have to do that if you're gonna find some way to even know a small amount of what's going on in Peter Gerhardsson's head. But the thing is, for Sweden, and you can actually look at this when Swedish and Scandinavian players in general defends when they play abroad. They are used to team play, team defending, zone defending. Most of the Swedish, even the Swedish national team players, they don't have their special abilities in the 1v1 situations and everything like that.
Mhm.
And that leaves us to where I do think it's important for Peter Gerhardsson to think about when he's going to select the Swedish squad. And that's the fact that it's about a team, not about individual performances.
Yeah.
It's about the team and how he wants to play his football and how he thinks football, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I do think that's I try to look at it from that point of view now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the second World Cup under him as well. In the first one, if I recall correctly, they claimed bronze. And then just recently in the Olympics as well, they fell short against Canada in a penalty shootout, claiming silver. I hope this picture does not bring back bad memories. But
no, I'm good. I've gotten over that part, I think.
Okay, that's good. And in the Euros, unfortunately, last summer it was a little bit disappointing, not only because they got knocked out by England in the fashion that they did, but in general, it looked like a weaker form. And perhaps I would say there was kind of like an identity crisis because before he came in, you talked about Sweden was the defensive side, and he's kind of revolutionized them into this fast-paced, high-tempo attacking minded side. And in the Euros, we didn't see either be on full fashion. So going into this World Cup, how do you think he'd avoid this identity crisis, or making sure those mistakes that happen in the Euros don't happen again?
Well, I don't agree fully
Yeah.
on the fact that Sweden fell short completely at the Euros, because I do think also I do know that, like, I do think it was Fridolina Rolfö that talked about the semi-final against England, where Sweden lost 4-0. But the first 20 minutes of that game, they played very good football. So this is the thing. If Sweden can deliver that level when they play, they can beat any team in the World Cup. And then you have to look at it from the fact that during those 20 minutes, they played yet again with a different backline. I think Fridolina Rolfö played as a wing back that game. Finally, most people would want to say. I'm not sure why. But so I do think that from those 20 minutes in the last tournament they played, I think that that's what Peter Gerhardsson sees. You know what I mean? He sees that they are capable of playing that type of football. But I do hope for the team's sake now that going into this tournament that they don't have to face COVID.
Yeah.
They don't have to face injuries and different formations in the units, even different formations in the whole team and stuff like that, because of course it affected them.
You mentioned England, and obviously in the past few games they've mixed up their opposition. And in the most recent outing, I'd say they had that dramatic like 3-0 with Norway. I bet you were a little bit stressed watching that one. But there's a slightly different set of groups a set of teams in their group. They've got Italy, Argentina, South Africa, quite different, especially the Argentina, like South American type of football. I mean, how do you look at their chances? Or, I mean, they're definitely one of the favorites, if not the favorite, to go out of that group. But in general, which nation do you think will offer the biggest amount of challenges for Sweden?
I do think that the team that will offer the biggest amount of challenges to Sweden is Sweden themselves. I'm gonna say that because obviously they are the favorites.
Yeah,
they're gonna win that group. With that being said, I do think, and this is also probably a bit weird for me to say, that I actually saw, because obviously from the Norway game, we conceded goals that we shouldn't concede. We shouldn't have conceded that goal against Denmark either in injury time. But the differences, the small details, when you looked at, let's take a player like Magdalena Eriksson, for example, that I do think it was Aston Villa, Chelsea played like very short after that Sweden gathering. And the way Magdalena Eriksson took away Rachel Daly, in that game, you could see small details, because when Norway crossed the ball inside the box, you could see that a player like Magda, she sort of trusted her teammate to take, maybe, okay, you're there, I'm here. Like, I'm not saying it was like that, because I can't, but you can look at it, look at the situation like this. And then you see Magda play and defend the box against Rachel Daly. You could see all of a sudden the small details she changed in her game, like watching over her shoulder before the ball came inside the box. So obviously, you know what I'm getting at? She had learned stuff from playing Norway and Denmark.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that these situations, they will not appear as often as they did against Denmark and Norway. That's what I'm thinking about, because football, when you play football as a player, you learn stuff and then you apply it onto the next game, and so it won't happen again.
And that's why they say you probably learn a little bit more in losses than wins, because when you're conceding goals in a game like a draw like that, or even that injury time goal against Denmark, you begin to notice these little patterns and these kind of tiny moments where players can work on individually, but as a team, you're able to communicate that. But I definitely agree with you, the fact that Sweden are the favorites to go through. They will probably top that group, just given the nations that they have and just the run that they've been on, mixing up their opposition. And you just mentioned Magdalena Eriksson. She's going to be absolutely vital. Is there any other player that you think is going to be just as important and will really rise to the occasion this time around?
I do think that, like I said from the beginning, that Sweden is a team. They don't rely on individual performances. I do think that that's what bugged me about the Euros, was that both Swedish media and a lot of other media outlets as well from all over the world thought that Fridolina Rolfö didn't raise to the occasion. And I do think that that's the exact same challenge that Norway has as well, with the likes of Caroline Graham Hansen, because we tend to compare how they perform in their club team, and that's FC Barcelona, and no other team, not even any other national team, plays football like Barcelona. So that's the thing. Obviously, I do think that there are lots of players in Sweden that we need to have the courage to say that they will make and can make a difference if needed. And that's obviously it's Fridolina Rolfö, it's Kosovare Asllani. I do think that we have players like Elin Rubensson at the midfield. I really cross my fingers that she will be fit to play a lot, because I do think she's a great footballer, probably a bit underestimated because she plays in the Swedish League, so she's not as known to the rest of the world as Kosovare Asllani and Fridolina Rolfö, and probably Magdalena Eriksson too. But as for if we're going back to the back line, I do think that every player in that back line are players that can make a difference. But yeah, we have good players in Sweden, and I think that the selection of them shows that the team will be the difference for Sweden.
Yeah. I think especially, I love how you stress on the fact that it's a team, because there's always a major conversation of, you've got individual players, but I think it doesn't matter if those individual players are able to perform if you can't let them perform as a team. And Sweden certainly has a lot of individual brilliance, but you need to put that together. So I love how you stress on that, because it is going to be massively important in a major tournament, and say, you're hopefully going into the final. It's going to be a long stretch of games. You can't really just rely on one player. And talking about that stretch of games, I'm afraid we're slightly running out of time, but I'd love to hear your kind of prediction, or where do you really see Sweden going? Obviously, I don't believe there's any other team that's podiumed the World Cup as much as they have without lifting a trophy. They've podiumed 4 times already without a trophy. Is this going to be a 5th podium with a trophy, hopefully, this time?
I think right now where the women's game are all over the world, in Europe, and the competition it offers, I do think that I'm going to be very Swedish now when saying this, because there was also a discussion about Sweden shouldn't have been so cocky last summer ahead of the Euros, and Adidas shouldn't have made that campaign on how to beat Sweden, but you do have to dare to say that you are good at what you do. And I do think Sweden, if they can get things together and play the football they played the first 20 minutes against England, they can beat any team in the world. I mean, I still think that the best game Sweden have ever played was probably the game against the US in the Olympics. And it's not such a long time ago. So,
and that was with COVID as well, so that was extra hard circumstances to take in.
Exactly. So if everything just clicks, I do think Sweden will reach far.
Yeah,
I do think that in this World Cup, every national team have their challenges in one way or another. Even England this time around. If we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So the team that will manage these challenges and these changes that the head coaches will have to make in their teams because of injuries and other circumstances, that's the team that will win this World Cup. Not necessarily the team that we think is the best in beforehand on paper.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard to look at a nation and be like they're going in fully fit. They're going in with a coach that's been with them for, as long as they have, or they're going in with exactly the players that they want. So certainly a lot of challenges. And I think, like you said, Sweden's biggest challenge is going to be Sweden and making sure that everything clicks for them and taking away the lessons from the Euros. But for those listening, how can they follow your detailed work about Scandinavian football and the Swedish national team now going into the World Cup? Hopefully they'll be making it far. So they're going to keep you busy with a lot of work. But how can people keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm gonna say playmaker.ai because we're gonna do a full squad summary in football analysis with clips and data to show the Swedish squad that is selected for this World Cup.
So everything that we just talked about is going to be beautifully explained and laid out from Mia on Playmaker. I'll definitely be keeping all links below. But Mia, I really, really appreciate you joining me on, again, our first episode. And who better team to talk about it than Sweden, going in as the favorites? I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now that we've covered a lot of bases for Sweden, we're going to dive into the 3 other nations joining them in Group G. And we're starting off with Italy. Italy will be making their 5th appearance in the World Cup, with their best performances being finishes in the quarterfinals in 1999, as well as the last World Cup in 2019. They've announced their pre-camp squad. They're yet to announce their full 23-player squad, but with that, we know there's some names that are definitely going to be going, and we're going to be talking plenty about them today. Italy will be looking to rebound from a disappointing run in last year's Euros after having not won a single game, only taken away a point, and finished bottom of their group. Something that this Italian side will definitely be feeling is their added benefit of having a lot of their players be based in Italy domestically. Not only is that league within itself getting a lot more competitive and improving with the parity between those teams, but there's going to be an impressive level of familiarity between a lot of these players that play together or against each other week in and week out. The ability to have your players be quite familiar with each other, play at a top level, and again feel that rise of the Serie A this season in the past 2-3 seasons really is going to be really important for how they conduct themselves come the World Cup. Bartolini has been in charge of this Italian side since 2017, so she's quite familiar with them and actually is one of the few coaches that has spent over 5 years with her nation going into the World Cup. Slowly but surely, she's been able to impose her style on the team. She has a massive emphasis on ball movement and kind of technique, and generally really trusts the players throughout the team's movement. Usually likes to line up in a 4-3-3, but sometimes goes back to the old school of 4-4-2, having Girelli and Giantini up front. This allows them to have emphasis on wide areas, which again goes back to their fast ball movement and technique emphasis that she loves to put on the squad. Cristiana Girelli, in my eyes, one of their key players, absolutely is able to excel in a 4-4-2 or a 4-3-3, or if you just are playing her as a lone striker, whatever kind of position you put her in, she's going to excel, and her fine form from Juventus is undoubtedly going to be very important to be able to get into the summer as well. She's already been capped over 100 times for country this season. She was also able to break the record of the most amount of goals scored for Juventus by a single player, over 100 goals as well. 5 goals out of 10 appearances in the Champions League despite being knocked out in the group stages. 23 appearances in the league with 15 goals. I mean, she has been on fire this season. Back in the 2019 World Cup, she scored a hat-trick against Jamaica in their second group stages game, which is exactly what you'll be looking for her to do. Banging goals, being able to be a leader on the pitch. She's 32. It's, there's probably not another World Cup. Maybe there is a World Cup in the next few years for her, but now peaking and making sure she's able to lead the team that's already full of leaders and plenty of youngsters is going to be absolutely crucial. Talking about youngsters, you're definitely going to have to keep an eye on Ariana Caruso, also Juventus midfielder. She's only 24. She's already hit that 100 appearances mark for Juventus, was actually the youngest player to do so. Very effective going forward, has a natural eye for creating assists and putting the ball in the right areas. This might be her first World Cup appearance, but definitely an appearance that's going to have a lot of eyes go on her. For them, it's such a strong, all-rounded team. They've got Bonansea, they've got Gali in the middle, they've got Giuliani in goal, who I think has also been having a very bright season herself. Rasucci, Saragama, again, it is not a team that you look at a certain lineup and be like, yeah, they've got a very good bunch of attackers. No, they've got a very good bunch of everywhere on the field. For them, they'll definitely be looking to make it out of the group stages. I think people are slightly overlooking how tough this group is going to be. Sweden clearly with flying colors will be able to make it out, but who is going to get that second runner-up spot is going to be very, very interesting. I definitely rate Italy for it. For them though, they have to come in confident, make sure that chemistry is able to really click in and they cannot crumble under pressure, because what we saw in the Euros, they simply just were not up for the occasion. Our third nation in this group, and one that I think if Italy is not able to pull through a group advancement, I think it's going to be South Africa. Let me explain. South Africa are coming off a historic 2022 after becoming the African champions for the first time ever after beating Morocco in the final. Their star players are being developed all across the world, and their star players are also able to show up on the big stage. And when I talk the big stage, I need you to really heavily look at that African Cup run. And even before the African Cup, to qualify for the African Cup, they only conceded a single goal. And they also were able to beat, in that same year, their first ever European opposition in the last 5 years. So South Africa is a nation that people are sleeping on and not really talking about how good they have been over the last year and a half. Now, their recent fixtures have kind of been a mixed bag of results. They drew to Slovenia and Uzbekistan, a game that they were likely edged to win, and they lost to Serbia, a narrow 3-2 defeat. These are only 3 fixtures that they've had leading up to the World Cup, but it is really good to see them switching up the opposition and going up after European names and nations that they previously weren't really able to secure in 2022 given the African Cup that was taking place. Their opening game is going to be Sweden, with the last game being Italy in the group stages. Now, they need to make sure they start off really, really well against Sweden. You always need to start off pretty well, and given Sweden as the first task is not going to be easy, but for them, they really would be wanting to look at having a good performance that maybe they necessarily would fall short and lose, but in a general nutshell, they want to make sure that they're having a good start, because you look at the African Cup, they had a good start and they just never looked back. Being able to carry that momentum was super crucial in their run overall in the African Cup, and I keep referring to the African Cup, but for a nation that had just won and had just been crowned as the African champions, you really have to assess what made them get to that point. They very much were able to rotate between like a 4-2-3-1, which is something that has been on the rise, and sometimes play a lower block of 4-4-1. That's kind of what I expect them to come up against Sweden. But What we have seen is that even when they play that 4-4-1 lower block, they're very good on the counter-attack, and that's given because of just how pacey their midfield and their front line is. She's super fast, really good movement, very available on the pitch in terms of she's happy to finish with her left foot, her right foot, a screamer from outside the box, a tap in, a header. She's very much in other words, a very complete striker, and I'm actually surprised a lot of people are not talking about her. Experience at the front, Tembi Catalanta, who's been out with injury. She's been out for almost a year, just returned a month ago with Louisville for her first game. It's also going to be important to make sure she is able to use her leadership skills on the field. But for South Africa, I think a lot of people are really overlooking them. They're super aggressive, super fast, really good on the counter attack. They can frustrate people playing that low block, but when they want to be a little bit more operative or kind of a scarier side, they slot in that 4-2-3-1 and execute it just as good as they would with the 4-4-1. If it's not Italy making it through, I really do have my money here on South Africa. The final nation in this group is going to be Argentina, who's actually going to be looking for the first ever win and their first ever points in the World Cup. You heard that right. They featured 3 times. This is their 4th time, and all 3 times have been knocked out in the group stages. For them, I think not even trying to make it out of the group stages, but for them showing that they're able to compete on the bigger stage, they're able to kind of make that run against the group nations that they're with is going to be their goal, and get a win, get your first World Cup win. I know it's absolutely crazy to think about. The men's just won the World Cup, and we're talking about the women's winning their first game in the World Cup, but in some ways you have to take these leaps and strides of baby steps, and if that means getting your first point and first win in the World Cup, so be it. Last year's Copa America, they were able to edge a 3rd place finish after losing a very close semifinal to the hosts Colombia, who went on to face Brazil, and also Brazil was able to win in the final. Experienced players like Stefani Benini, you've probably seen her at Atletico Madrid, but she's 32, being reintegrated back into the squad after being out for some time, and she was really crucial in Argentina securing that World Cup's qualification and the run in the Copa America. But she's 32 now. She will be able to bring that experience in some of these nitty-gritty games where maybe you're really trying to edge a win or a point for at least of things at the end of the match. And I talk experience, you really have to take a look at their defensive bunch. They've also got their captain, Aldana Cometti. What you're looking for in this defensive experience is they will be able to handle pressure pretty well and do so confidently. It's not just that backline that's got talent. Up front, they've got Mariana Larroquette, which in other words, you can just call her the Rocket because she's just so good at scoring goals. And you certainly cannot forget Yamila Rodriguez, who anytime you're watching Argentina, you're like, wow, who's that absolute tank running everywhere? I mean, she will be at you and she will be aggressive to go get the ball. And not only is she a tank, but she can score. She scored 6 goals in that Copa America run, including a very important equalizer against Panama in that 3rd spot playoff, which sent Argentina into extra time, and who eventually were able to win and grab that bronze medal in Copa America. For them, it's hard to see them get out of the group stages. A win, most importantly, a few points will be important. It's not an easy group to do so, but for now, you have to start build momentum for Argentina. That wraps up our Group G. Let me know your opinions, your thoughts. Who do you think is going to top it? And what are your overall thoughts on some of these games that are going to be absolutely incredibly interesting in this group specifically that people are not really talking about? As always, share your opinions below. To stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.